Well, everyone, thank you so much for popping in on a Monday morning. It means a lot to have all of you here to learn a little bit more about this new initiative that MOBTS is undertaking. I am going to, along with a couple colleagues, share a little bit more about the Collegiate Leadership Competition this morning. And so I think I would love to start, though, with Brandon. And Brandon, if you would, maybe you talk a little bit about this relationship with MOBTS, how we're thinking about that, because this is really, really exciting.
Absolutely. So I've been working with the CLC for the last 2 years now. And while I've been with them, we've been doing online competitions. But the roots of this organization and this competition are in face-to-face format. And that's what we're getting back to for the upcoming year, as well as keeping our online format. With that, in discussions between Scott and I and Scott and the CLC board, we understood that in order for the CLC to reach its potential and to kind of maximize the height of that ceiling and see the vision of the CLC come to fruition, that we needed another vehicle, maybe a larger vehicle, the networking that might come with collaborating and tying into another organization. And through that, and with my role as executive director with MOBTS for the last 13 years, it seemed like a natural fit. And our MOBTS board thankfully agreed that it was a natural fit as well. So we're now moving forward with the MOBTS CLC. And Scott's going to go into the different events that we're going to have over the course of the year. In total, there will be 3 conferences that we run between March and April. The relationship here is very much within the scope and the mindset and the vision of MOBTS. At the end of the day, what CLC is performing is experiential learning. And for those of you in the room here that may be somewhere else across the management disciplines that MOBTS satisfies and seeks to provide, that enhancement of the quality of teaching and learning across those management disciplines, you might not be in leadership, but as MOBTSers, you know that you can walk into any one of our sessions during our conferences and kind of lift that template off the vehicle that it's on and apply it somewhere else. And if you're outside that leadership room and maybe you're looking for teamwork and group or conflict or anything along those lines, this is perfect. Utilize this template that CLC is providing, utilize this experience that CLC is providing you, and apply it to that classroom within whatever concept and construct your classroom focuses on. So this is more than just leadership. Leadership is the vehicle. If you specialize in leadership, if you concentrate in leadership, all the better. But I do believe that in the MOBTS spirit and the MOBTS lens, this applies across the management disciplines. So we'll get into that a little bit later. For the most part, this will be Scott and his team talking through the session. I'll certainly be around to answer any questions that are needed. If there's any greater discussion to be had in terms of the integration with CLC, how it might fit into the MOBTS annual conference, our journals, things along those lines. But for now, I'm going to hand it back to Scott, and we're going to learn about the nuts and bolts of the CLC.
Great. Thank you so much, Brandon, for your support. Kevin Lowe is on the Zoom right now. He has been incredibly supportive in helping shepherd this relationship as well. Dave, your big moment is coming up here in just a moment, so you're going to have to unmute yourself. Would you go ahead and read this quote for us, sir?
This is from Peter Vale, who had been my teacher a long time ago and remained my teacher until he passed away in March of 2020. A final chronic problem with teaching and training about leadership is that there's no doing it, and then there's no talking about it. No amount of talking about it seems to result in people become better at doing it. That's Peter Vale.
Yes, he's a fellow with MOBTS and just an incredible thinker. And that quote right there, everyone, kind of captures the spirit of what we're up to with the CLC. What we're trying to do, essentially, is create a practice field. Create a practice field for students. Because, as Peter said, you can sit in a room and talk about it, but that doesn't seem to result in people getting better at the activity of leading others. It's kind of like sitting in a room and talking about football or soccer or surgery. No amount of talking about it. I don't want that person who's been talking about surgery a lot to perform surgery on me. So that's what we're trying to do. It's established in 2015, and we have actively been learning a lot. We have a couple people on the Zoom today who you'll hear from in a little bit, who've been engaged for a period of time with the CLC, a couple coaches. They're going to share some of their insights today. But ultimately, what we are trying to do is create a practice field for leadership development and leadership learning. And as Brandon said, I think what we're doing can be applied to so many different concepts and ways of thinking. So we look forward to having that conversation with you in just a little bit. So the Collegiate Leadership Competition was founded in 2015. I am a co-founder, and I'm the current board chair of the organization. And since 2015, we've been engaged in this grand experiment. How do you coach leadership? How do you judge leadership? What does leadership practice look like? What is a leadership competition? We've been engaged in that work. We've been experimenting. Some years we have failed miserably. Other years we have had great successes, but we're learning and we're failing forward, and we're working this adaptive challenge of how we do this work. And we're conducting research on it, and it's been just a lot of fun. I'm going to share a little bit more of the details in just a moment, but this is why we do what we do. It's individuals like this on the screen who are in college, which is a beautiful practice field in general for leader development. So can we be giving them some tools and some ways of thinking about leadership so that not only are they practicing here with us, but on Friday night or Saturday night or Thursday night in their student activities programming board meeting, they're practicing leadership as well. But these folks right here are the reason we do what we do. So here's a little bit of how it works. Teams are made up of 6 students. They can be graduate students. They don't have to necessarily be undergraduate students. These students come from every degree and every major. They don't have to be simply in colleges of business. We've had ROTC, we've had engineering, we have people from all over the university, and all ages have participated. So each team has a coach, and the coach is the heart of the experience. As you can imagine, they are the person who's making this experience real for their teams. So each team has a coach, and according to the research, that is the most important piece of this whole experience, is that individual who is caring and passionate about building relationships with their team, among their team, and then helping those students connect the dots and make sense of learning. We train the coaches in the fall, so that would be happening over the next few months. We have a weekly practice guide, and we have a coach's guide that really make this as turnkey as possible for our coaches. And because we know that the coaches are the most important part of this experience, they are the customer in our eyes. We do our best to ensure that they are prepared and that they feel good about what they're about to embark upon. Sometimes teams are curricular, as in it's a class. So for instance, I teach a class. Dave, who you'll meet in a little bit, teaches a class, and so does Lisa, who you'll meet. But sometimes it's a co-curricular activity. Sometimes in schools all over North America right now, we're in Canada and the United States, but about half the teams are curricular, half the teams are co-curricular, which provides this really cool kind of blend. And sometimes people say, well, I bet the curricular teams always win. No, it's about half and half. And we can get into some of the details as to why that might be also. But each team learns the curriculum, has a weekly practice of about 90 minutes. Again, if that's class, then it's just class. And they learn the rubric. There's a rubric that aligns with the curriculum that is used when we judge the performance of the team. And I'll tell you a little bit more about that in a moment. The curriculum is a piece of integrative scholarship of about 10 topics. So we might have attributes of effective leaders, attributes of effective teams. We have a problem-solving model where we're actually building skill. We talk about leadership styles. We talk about followership styles. We talk about ethical decision-making. We talk about navigating difficult conversations. So there's 10 kind of buckets of topics, influence and influence tactics. And the teams learn those concepts. They have to have them in their head. We create this shared language. So what we're trying to do from a theoretical perspective is we're trying to kind of hit a few different orientations of learning. We want some cognitive understanding. We're doing some skill building. We're doing some social cognitive by providing them with a coach. We're doing some experiential learning, so kind of some constructive developmentalism, and really providing students with an experience. And then there's this humanistic lens, which is all about reflecting and really, really making sense of the experience. So the curriculum is a piece of integrative scholarship, and we've integrated a number of different ways of thinking about the topic, and it's not necessarily an academic tone. Again, some of these teams are co-curricular, so we want the students to learn these concepts and then engage. So it's about going deeper with less content. It's not going to be like an intro textbook that has 1,000 things. It's going to go deep on about 10 buckets of content. I think in all, Lisa, you could correct me if I'm wrong, we probably have about 90, 95 separate concepts that the students then kind of internalize, learn, and practice. The season is January through April 2024. Now, here's the thing about the season. The Canadian schools are back sometimes January 2nd, and the University of Delaware doesn't go back till February 4th. So it's kind of an interesting time and an interesting space to make all of this work from a time standpoint. But generally speaking, teams are practicing January through April. And we host monthly coach meetings for individuals. They aren't mandatory, but if coaches want to get together, have conversations, and really what we're trying to do with the coaches is create a learning community for our coaches. We're also trying to create research opportunities for our coaches, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a bit. There's also an online virtual scrimmage in February. So teams and students who've never heard of this, what in the world is a leadership competition going to be like? And sometimes first-time coaches, what in the world? Yeah, I've heard it, what you've explained it to me, but I have no clue what this is going to look like. There's an online virtual scrimmage in February where teams can get a better sense and coaches can get a better sense of, okay, how is this going to work? This is really, really interesting. So January through April, leadership practice. That could be a class, doesn't have to be a class. Do the students have to come from business or management? No. Can they be in any grade? Yes, they can be. Probably not high school students, but post-secondary up. Now, the competition. Okay, so my co-founder, Arthur Schwartz, said this. Well, why do people practice? To compete or to perform? So the competition piece of all of this is really just an excuse to get students to practice and for us to practice and create some time and some space. Because at the competition, we always say there are winners and there are learners. And most of us, if not all of us, are learners throughout this process. The winning is a little bit of a byproduct. But for some teams and for some coaches, that becomes a very, very kind of strong motivator for them. So here's how the competition works. There's 2 live and 1 online competition. There's 6 activities at each competition, okay? Each student, 6 people on each team, each student gets to lead 1 activity. So they kind of have their moment to shine, to put what they've been practicing into action. And teams are given an activity sheet. Now, what I'm going to do is you'll have access to this presentation, so you'll be able to click that link, but they're given a 1-page document of what they have to do. We design all of these from scratch. These are not team building exercises that you will find anywhere else. These are completely built 100% by us. Maybe we're using some popular resources, but generally speaking, we write each one of these activities. So a team, if it's live, I want you to imagine a big ballroom with 10 rounds of 10 seats, and everyone's competing in one big ballroom, and they're all given an activity sheet, and they're told you have 45 minutes, go, and then they have to accomplish something. If it's online, they're given the assignment, and they zoom off to a Zoom room, and they work there. That's where they do their work. And after each one of these activities are hard. They are not easy. We are reflecting after each activity. Coaches can't talk during the actual activity, which is the most painful part of this experience, because everything you've been talking about and training for flies out the window sometimes as soon as we put some shiny object in front of their face. But we know we're getting further when they do stay present. They do stay locked in. They are using the curriculum to kind of chart their path forward. That's how we know we're winning. But that reflection after each activity is absolutely critical. We spend about 15 to 20 minutes really debriefing what went well, what we need to think about next time. And again, these are difficult. The two judges at each table or in each Zoom room complete what's called the leader and team effectiveness skill sheet. You'll have access to that as well. And that's just a rubric that's aligned with a curriculum. And we're not just looking at the leader and how they performed, we're looking at the leader and the team. And so those two scores that those judges give are averaged, and then students can get 100 points on the process, the rubric, and they can get 100 points on the results, how they did on the activity. Now, here's the thing. Sometimes teams, now if you're Dave Levy's team, you're getting 100 points on process every time because they're incredible. And you'll hear from Dave in a couple minutes. But the results, these activities are hard. Sometimes they're designed that a team won't get more than 40 or 60 out of 100 points, or it's going to be very difficult for a team to do that. And again, we want to create almost a simulator, an opportunity for students to practice and be challenged in a fairly safe space. So there might be a couple activities in a row where the team maybe gets 85 on process and 30 or 40 on results. And can they stay up? Can they stay in? Can they display that grit? Can they display the optimism? And it's likely a lot of other teams are struggling with some of that as well. There's an awards ceremony, and we give out awards like the team that did the best on process or the team that did the best on results. We have teams select a most valuable player, someone who really just showed up all season and did a great work in that way. There's overall winners, first, second, third. And at the end, and this is my favorite meeting of the year when it comes to CLC, I don't know that my team has ever won. Actually, the first year when there were only two teams, my team won. But my favorite meeting is about 2 weeks after the competition. We get together, we get some pizza, and we sit in a room and we just laugh for about 2 hours. And we have we have this shared language, this shared experience of involving all these kind of random activities that we had to engage in, and we connect the dots and we learn. But all day long at the competition, the students are getting triggered. They're getting sucked in. They're navigating stress, which is another one of the topics. They're navigating stressors, and they're really challenged to, again, put what we've been discussing into action. And it's easy to sit in a room and talk about emotional intelligence kind of at a cognitive level. This provides students with an experience to live the necessity for emotional intelligence, or have the experience where they didn't display it and they can debrief it. And if we've done a really, really good job as coaches, that team is so tight at the end that they're having those conversations with one another. And it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful. And the goal is that we're coaching in a way that gets them there to that point. So a couple other details. So this is based on there's a wonderful book, Merriam and Caffarella, Learning in Adulthood. And in that book, one of the editions, they had this table. And again, I kind of shared with you those 5 orientations of learning. We're trying to build their cognitive understanding of leadership. We're trying to build some skill. We're trying to build some self-awareness. We're trying to give them a coach or a mentor, and we are trying to provide them with an experience. Again, somewhat of a simulator is what we're trying to do. And so there's that kind of foundation of learning theory. And I wrote an article with Ron Riggio and Dave Rush. It's in JME, and it kind of nicely talks about how we think about that space that we're experimenting with. And then there's also the notion of deliberate practice, which is K. Anders Ericsson. How do we build expertise? And in a very simplistic way, Ericsson has more than 4, but time, repetition, real-time coaching and feedback, and working on skills outside of your current ability level. So we're trying to create a place where students can deliberately practice leadership, and that's a goal. And you will have access to this at the end of the slide deck. You will see the number of links of some articles that we've published, the Journal of Leadership Education, some other bounded volumes and edited books. And we have some podcast episodes that really try and explain a little bit more, because we want this to be evidence-based. Our goal is that this is evidence-based. We are not there yet. we have just dipped our toes in this. And so we're creating this community of scholars who we have video of students engaged in a 45-minute activity on Zoom, leading, not leading, crashing, burning, showing emotional intelligence, struggling with emotional intelligence. We have video of all of that. So there's just this treasure trove of opportunity when it comes to research. And so if any of you are kind of interested in that space, this is a really, really cool opportunity where we could go in a number of different directions there. Our goal is to have a coaches meeting at MOBTS in 2024. And, again, like I shared with you a little bit ago, there's some podcasts and articles that you'll have access to. If you want to learn a little bit more about the theoretical underpinnings or what we've found so far, or just podcast discussions with coaches about what their experience is, or you'll also have access to conversations with winning teams. So if you want to hear a team that won, debrief and just kind of talk about what they got out of the experience, you'll have access to those as well. The financial investment, it's $995 US per team. So that's if it's a live competition. There's a Canadian, and I'm going to share this with you in a moment. There's a Canadian invitational, a US invitational, and then the global challenge. The global challenge is online. Some teams can't afford to travel to, in the case of Canadian, Brantford, Ontario, and in the case of the US, John Carroll University in Cleveland, Ohio. So we have the live and the virtual opportunity. But if your team chooses to participate live, it's $995 per team, US. If your team would also like to participate in the live competition and the online virtual, it's an additional $100. Teams that just want to participate in the online virtual competition, that's $495 US per team. So some schools choose to have 2, 3, 4 teams because, for instance, I have a class, I might have 24 students. I might have an internal competition within my class, and then the top 3 teams compete. So I might do something like that also. So schools can have multiple teams, but generally speaking, schools have between 1 and 2 teams. So how it works in the spring. In February, we have that virtual scrimmage. This is where first-time coaches, the participants, kind of get a sense of, oh my gosh, that was really hard. I wasn't expecting that. Sometimes my students last year said, oh, I don't want to be on Zoom anymore. They don't even realize they're on Zoom. They get so sucked into the activity that 45 minutes flies, and they're so engrossed in the 15-minute debrief because of everything that went on. They don't know they've been on Zoom for 2 hours. They have no clue. It's beautiful to watch. And so we have this virtual scrimmage where people can just get a taste of what the actual competition is going to be like from an online perspective. But it's a similar type activity if the person was live as well. We have the Canadian invite, which is the in-person on March 16th, and the US invite, which is also March 16th. It's a little bit earlier, and again, from the US perspective, but our Canadian schools finish school much earlier than the US schools. So if we move into April, they're kind of done. And in the United States, for instance, generally speaking, in April, you're getting into a lot of the end of the year activities. But the online global challenge is the 4th and the 6th. It's a Thursday night, 3 activities. Then Friday, you can debrief with your team, make sense of what happened, and then lock back in Saturday morning. So the online challenge is over 2 periods. Keeping students online for 6-7 hours kind of in a row was too much. And so that's kind of the experiment that we've been running. And all times are in Eastern time zone that you can see right there. So we have 2 coaches, and Dave and Lisa, I would love for you, if you would, to go ahead and share a little bit. Lisa, maybe we start with you. And if you would, share a little bit about your experience. And Brandon, maybe we can spotlight Dave and Lisa just so that people can make sure that they see them. And I can stop sharing for the moment so folks can see them as well. Lisa, would you be willing to start us off?
Absolutely. Hi, everybody. My name is Lisa Kiran. I'm an assistant professor in leadership at Wilfrid Laurier University. I think this will be my 5th season being part of CLC. So I've had 4 seasons with them. It's been such a fantastic experience. And so I've got a few sort of insights along the way that I'd like to share with you. I've got to say, it's not a stretch to say that the CLC has been a transformative experience for my teaching. I teach this as a class, so it is a curricular experience at Wilfrid Laurier, but the gains that I've had from being involved in this organization has definitely penetrated to some of the other courses that I've taught. So that's a wonderful opportunity to begin there. I think it's been so transformative to my teaching, in part because of the lessons that the students have learned along the way that really reinforces these values and motivates me to continue. But also just because it encourages me to really embody the philosophy of CLC, that we can all be excellent leaders, followers, and team members if we're willing to engage in that deliberate practice that Scott talked about. I've seen a lot of fear from my students in the last few years. There's fear, there's uncertainty, and there's the potential for shame that can really hold the students back from being willing to try new things, especially outside of their comfort zone that Scott said was important to deliberate practice. And so rather than try to tell students you should just try anyway, the CLC experience really creates this safe space for students to experiment safely together. What a better way to explain this than to quote one of my students who said, "This course allowed me to grow in so many ways, as it gave me the opportunity to learn new leadership skills, practice them, and most importantly, reflect on my performance in a safe and comfortable environment. Overall, this course allowed me to grow in areas I didn't know were possible, leaving me feeling as though I can tackle any challenge I'm faced with confidence. For this, I am extremely grateful, and I would not have completed this course feeling this satisfied and excited for the future without the help and the guidance from the coaches." And so just like Scott said, the coaches are really at the heart of this experience, but it's the students who will really keep you as a coach interested and engaged and keep going. What I like about the quote that I shared is that it really highlights the value of this experiential learning. Let's be honest, we all know that experiential learning is valuable. That's why we're part of MOBTS. It's valuable for us and it's valuable for our students. But if we're also honest, it can be really challenging trying to find the right activity. What if it doesn't work? What if we don't get the results that we wanted? Not only does the CLC provide these opportunities and these activities for us to experiment with, it also reminds us that there's just value in trying anyways. Because in life, school, work, and leadership, the process of trying and learning from experience is just as valuable, if not more valuable, than the results that we get at the end. This is an important reminder for us as educators, as well as our students. There are so many lessons that we can learn by understanding what worked and what didn't, with how we did something. And to be sure, just like Scott, my team has never won the CLC, but we've had so much fun and we've learned so much along the way, and especially with regard to how to manage our emotions, because the emotions, they're real in that competition. There's something that really just raises that heat in being competition with one another. Even when we fail, we learn together. We've had so many small and big wins along the way, thanks to the CLC experience and how it fosters that learning and orientation and the need to experiment and reflect in an ongoing manner, both reflecting individually and as part of a team. In terms of individual development, I've seen confident students who are used to leading the way recognize that they need to step back and empower others and let them take that on. I've witnessed students who were accustomed to being a bit more passive and didn't really want to be involved become so empowered by the curriculum and their peers and their coaches to really just harness their strengths and become a more confident versions of themselves. It's been really, really wonderful. From a team perspective, the feedback and reflection sessions after each activity, I think, are really at the heart of the experience because it allows us to share constructive feedback with one another. Normalizing that different people need different things in different situations is such a wonderful way to reinforce the value of diversity and inclusion and to engage our critical thinking skills. Through continued practice and support, our students come to see the value in giving constructive feedback, even when it's hard, because they're so afraid of being mean to each other. But they come to realize that constructive feedback is actually the kind thing, because together we can move forward to a more positive future and really grow alongside of each other. That constructive feedback reminds them to be an active participant in their lives rather than just a passive receiver, that they have the capacity to influence people, to change situations, and really help themselves and their teams accomplish a goal. So just a little closing thought to finish. The developmental opportunities that I think the CLC has afforded me, both personally and professionally, is a product of the intentionality and the accessibility built into the curriculum. Our core concepts are organized on acronyms, which you can see on my shirt. Let me stand a little bit here. This is a shirt that my team made a couple of years ago as part of the competition activities in the practice season. And the core concepts being organized into acronyms decreases the learning curve, which really helps us focus on what really matters: practicing, reflecting, and learning together. So I hope you see we have a wonderful ecosystem here within CLC that will help you and your students be successful.
And Lisa, you reminded me that sometimes the coaches are as a coach, I'm learning all the time as well about me and about emotional intelligence and all of this as well. So, so good. Dave, would you be willing to share a couple words, sir?
Absolutely, but mine are not as well prepared. So Lisa just embarrassed me. So I am a professor at the Air Force Academy, and the Air Force Academy is known as a leadership laboratory. So, you may ask, why in the world would we be involved in CLC since we have our own curriculum that's focused on leadership? But it turns out the curriculum is absolutely fantastic, and I can use it. And my background is organizational behavior, and I can use it as a springboard for discussions on almost any organizational behavior topic. And so I use the CLC as a leadership capstone. So I have either 2 teams of 6 or 1 team of 12. I do it as an additional course, while I'm teaching my other courses. And I actually have the luxury of being able to recruit students. So I make them fill out an application. They get to choose a number of different capstones. We have a consulting capstone, we have a finance capstone, we have an innovation capstone. I'm probably missing a couple. And this is a leadership capstone that our management majors can select. And I have them fill out a little Google form on why they might be interested in this particular capstone. And they'll start talking about all the leadership experience they had. And they say they're a perfect fit for it. And then I select them. And then, we run them through on day 1. I will give them the rubric, the form that we grade for the competition and throughout the semester, and say, hey, look, this is actually different than many of your other leadership experiences. You are going to get constructive feedback using this particular rubric. We study it, we explore it. I give them a couple days, and then I give them their first exercise, usually a virtual exercise where we, disperse them. I give them that 1-page activity sheet. We get a leader to lead the project. They're usually arguing over who's going to be the leader because they all think they're awesome leaders. And so they go and do this thing. 45 minutes later, they come back. Their heads are low to the ground. And, I don't pull punches. I'll say, wow, that was just a disaster. Right? What do you have to say for yourself? And they're like, well, what do you mean? I'm like, well, look at my score sheet. Right. And they think they did phenomenally well, but they are not collaborating. They're basically become autocrats, just dictating responses. They're not inclusive at all. I mean, they're missing every single thing on the sheet, and usually they don't get the results either. So, we go through the sheet and they're like, oh, okay, yeah, I guess I didn't really do that. And we go, we look at where they can improve the next week, ever so slightly better, but they have these habits, these ideas in their mind that, to them, at least as being a military leader, they've got to be on charge. They've got to be making all the decisions, and any collaboration is a sign of weakness, even though our academic classes for 4 years are talking about effective teams, they're talking about inclusivity, they're talking about collaboration, but it's just rhetoric. It gets back to that Peter Vale quote, right? And yet when they have the rhetoric, they think it actually, affects their actions when it really doesn't. And so throughout the semester, it's just so heartwarming to see the growth to where they finally become very, very process oriented, collaborative, and inclusive. And the followers, when they're not the team leaders, are raising their hands saying, I think, Joe hasn't spoken yet. I think Joe has something worthy of listening to. Let's jump in. So it's just been nothing but an amazing experience. And I think I don't have the direct quote, but it was probably 6 months ago, one of our students who graduated the previous year, who went into special forces, right? The baddest of the bad in the military. It's a year-long pipeline of really incredibly rigorous training. And here he spent 4 years at the Air Force Academy in all these various leadership roles. And yet he texted me, he felt compelled. He said, sir, I can't believe I'm telling you this, but I absolutely am shocked at how often I go back to those tools that we had in that collegiate leadership, experience. And he's just, thank you so much. So that ended up being the most, formational experience of his 4 years at the Air Force Academy, was kind of, and let's be honest, some of those acronyms are kind of corny. When I first saw them, I'm like, really? And they think it's corny, but man, they memorize them and they hold on to them long after graduation. And so as someone who's very much into experiential learning, what often happens is I will come up with an experiential learning, exercise for my other courses. We do it in the class. They have a great time with it. And then we move on to a different topic. What I love about the curriculum here, in the CLC, is it's very deliberate and it's repetitive. Repetitive in a good way, right? You don't just do an exercise once and then you move on to something else. You keep applying the rubrics and those tools throughout the term so that they form positive habits for each of the students. So I honestly cannot say enough about the curriculum, and I had nothing to do with its development. I'm very jealous of the curriculum because the people that put it together are just absolutely amazing, and the product is wonderful. And I've actually pulled it into the other courses I teach as well. So yeah, it sounds like Lisa and I are like paid testimonials for it, but you can't make this up. We actually do just love being a part of the CLC, and I think it's something to consider. Oh, and one last thing, as far as professional development for me, I'm a full professor. I have no promotions left. But if I wasn't, right, if I was an assistant professor, what I'm currently doing is when we have our exercises, I invite other faculty members, my colleagues, and also alum, people that are, graduated like 30 years ago that are corporate leaders now, saying, hey, would you like to be a guest judge for our cadets? And they all say yes, because we can do it through a Zoom session. They jump in, see our cadets, in action, and the cadets have that added, pressure that they don't want to look bad in front of a CEO or a general or a colonel. And so they kind of thrive on that additional pressure. And my colleagues come in not having any idea of what I actually do in the classroom. And they just, usually they say, so you actually don't teach at all, right? You just say, go, they disperse, they're engaged in this. That's what they, to a person, that's what they tell me. And then the second things out of their mouths were, wow, that was amazing. I'm jealous. You can tell the students love it and you're loving it too. So it's been nothing but positive. So I'll stop there, but yeah, feel free to email me if you want to have a one-on-one conversation about it. I am a true believer into my third year now.
Well, Dave, thank you so much. And you reminded me of a quote that I think is an important quote, and I think it's no pressure, no diamond. And so there is a little bit of pressure, but it's that challenge and support model where we're trying to challenge, but we're also there supporting, so that zone of proximal development. I mean, we're always trying to kind of get them into that space right there. And like I said, after Lisa, you know, I also am learning so much about how we coach this, how little my students are likely putting into real action by just going through some of that repetition that Dave spoke of. It's really, really been a fun process. But it's an experiment, and it's not perfect yet. It's not there, and we're learning. And so we also don't want to present to you that everything is perfect and it's locked in. And no, we are individuals, a community of individuals kind of passionate about, okay, how do we do this work better? How do we do this work differently? And in a way where, again, it's evidence-based, and we can really start to look back at the difference that we've made. And so I do want to make sure that we emphasize that you would be part of a community that's building and growing, and most importantly, learning. After each competition, we get the coaches on a Zoom. What was the good, bad, and the ugly? What do we need to never do again? What do we need to try differently? What perspectives do you have? We get that feedback from the students so that we can, again, stay in that kind of process of continual growth and development. Lisa, I just sent you the most recent version of the PowerPoint, just so you know that you have it. Maybe you could post that in the chat, but I want to make sure that I just share with you. If you do want to read some articles or listen to a podcast, last year's winning team was Team Concordia, that episode 182. You could listen to that, just get their perspectives on what the experience was like. You'll have access to those resources. But I guess we wanted to conclude. Brandon, let me know if I'm missing anything. Dave or Lisa, please, if we miss something. We wanted to conclude by spending a little bit of time offering you an opportunity to ask questions, if you have any.
So in the chat here, Candace had a question about basically what I hit upon earlier in terms of teaching or implementing this beyond a leadership course. So Candace teaches strategy. So what examples do we have of bringing a team into such a leadership competition outside of leadership-centric courses?
Okay. So that would be a fun. So first of all, I'll say this. So I would love to have that conversation, Candace. So we could kind of think through, if I better understood what you're doing and how you're approaching that class, and then I could kind of share with you at least my perspectives on how this could align. I think the curriculum is influence tactics, attributes of effective teams, problem solving, it's navigating stressors. So if you wanted to create an experience, like sometimes it happens in a strategy course, like a simulation, where there's pressure to perform, there's pressure to develop a strategy and then implement and execute. I mean, we could talk about how some of those different connections could be made. And so I would offer, my email's right here, please reach out. We could have a conversation. And once I know a little bit more about how you're approaching it, I could at least try and make some connections for you. But anyone who's leading an organization will experience the stress. Anyone leading an organization will have to influence others about the direction forward. We'll have to identify a strategy to solve whatever the puzzle that we're working on right now. And in the context of, like, if we were to just look at it from a Snowden and Boone kind of framework of a simple problem, a complicated problem, complex and chaotic, these are kind of complicated problems. So we're not making them so difficult that it's this large kind of theoretical adaptive challenge or complex challenge, where they're challenged with these kind of complicated issues that they're confronted with navigating. But they aren't simple. No one on the team has the knowledge. They're going to have to figure out their best path forward.
There's two additional questions in the chat. Maria Quijada, I'm going to get to yours in just a second. Tracy Sigler asked about graduate teams, and this is actually a question that I received from 3 other people in private messages. So there's a lot of interest amongst this group with graduate teams. So what are the experiences of the graduate student teams and co-curricular teams?
Great. Okay. So co-curricular teams win about half the time. Our theory on that is because they're incredibly passionate and they've raised their hand. Sometimes if it's my students and it's a class and I say, hey, you're going to do this competition at the end, for a faction of them, they're like, okay, but they didn't like raise their hand and say, yes, I want to learn about leadership. So about half the time, the co-curricular teams are winning. What was the first part of the question, Brandon? I totally blanked.
Graduate teams.
Yes, please, 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 please. We've had graduate teams of nurses. We have had graduate teams from business. We've had graduate teams participate. They never do better than the undergraduate teams because, again, so much of this is about, can you put this into action and behaviorally implement these learnings? And so rarely does a graduate team do any better than the undergraduate team, but we would love to have them involved because it's also, oh, wow, there's a graduate team participating. And sometimes the undergraduates are intimidated by that, but they shouldn't be. If they've practiced and if they've prepared, they're going to do great. So graduate teams, we'd love to have them involved. And our experience has been so far, they don't do any better.
And let's look at it from the other end of the kind of the academic spectrum in terms of, not graduate, but community colleges. Was it last year or 2 years ago? Community college won the entire event.
Yeah, 2 years ago, Johnson County
Yeah.
Community College in Johnson County, Kansas. Yeah, so we have 2-year institutions. We have conducted this in high schools. We have not allowed high school students to compete in the collegiate version. It was just all other high school teams. But yes, I mean, 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, Canadian, US, we want to be global. We are not yet. We want teams from all over the world to participate, but lots of different types of institutions, liberal arts, STEM, I mean, just you name it, kind of across the board, in the type of institution as well. And last year, Concordia University from Nebraska, they were the winners. University of Delaware a couple of years ago. So the winning teams is also from various types of institutions.
So Maria Quiata has some good questions here. Now that we've kind of looked at this from a bird's eye view and who are we and what we do, what do we do, and what are we looking to achieve, she's got several questions here on logistics that we should probably tackle.
Great, sounds good.
And the most basic one is just, what is the time commitment in terms of the preparation for the global or say face-to-face competition? Maria's asking about the global competition. What's the time commitment even outside of class? How much time does any faculty member need to ask of their students?
Okay, great. So if it's a curricular experience, it's just class. So I run class, and my class is the CLC curriculum, again, through like April 1, and then we do a whole bunch of other stuff after the actual competition. Students love the class, by the way, to what Dave was saying and what Lisa was saying. They love it and they get into it. And it's unlike anything they've ever experienced. It's not a theoretical kind of in my head case competition, which you see sometimes. This is embodied learning. They are in and they are learning. And so I think that's one really, really important point that I want to make sure that we kind of emphasize. Logistics, 1.5 hours a week. In the fall, if you are a coach, you are going to be planning to spend maybe over the holiday break. You're going to spend 10 hours preparing, going through the weekly practice guide, the coach's guide, which are 20-page documents that we want them to be enough, but we don't want them to be thick and like not useful. So you just have to spend a little bit of time becoming familiar with the curriculum, familiar with the weekly practice guide and the coach's guide, reaching out to us on the board. We are more than happy to help you. We'll get you in touch with other coaches who've won, other coaches who just finished their first year. So we try and provide you with that support network. But ahead of season, 10, 12 hours. In season, 1.5 hours actually in practice, maybe 30, 45 minutes prepping for practice. What I always say to first-time coaches is the most important thing about this whole experience, number one, is that you're building relationships with your team members. Number two, that you're facilitating relationships being built among the team members. Number three, the curriculum will follow. And if we're building those strong relationships, we build that sense of team, and the students, especially if it's your first time coaching, don't know how it should be. So that weekly practice guide is really right there, and it will tell you exactly what you need to prioritize.
Okay, questions are coming in fast and furious here. It's a good sign. Jennifer Uri asked, how have other institutions funded the registration fee plus the travel lodging for the students?
Great. Okay. I can send the three questions we get: funding, recruiting students oftentimes, which is an interesting one, because if you're, recruiting students to participate and finding a coach, those are the three most common questions we get as to, and reasons why teams don't participate or schools don't participate. We couldn't find a coach, we couldn't find 6 students, or we couldn't find the funding. So we have a list of ways that other institutions have found the funding. Sometimes it's through student government. Sometimes it's through a special fund in the College of Business because they like to participate in competitions, and that's helpful. So I think that would be another one where, similar to the strategy question, I would want to talk with you and get to know your unique situation. And then my experience of just working with different schools, I will come up with different ways of similar situations, how they've been navigated. So sometimes teams also, there's been a lab fee associated with the class. Sometimes it's a special one-time kind of distribution from the dean or from some other pocket of the university that has a little bit of money. Sometimes it's faculty development. I want to do this faculty development experience. I'm going to coach this leadership team. It's going to align with some of my research agenda. Sometimes it's come out of research funds because they're going to do research on this experiential learning exercise. So we've seen, I've never experienced a crafty individual who's thinking innovatively not find the money in their institution. It's just, we have to get creative about how to ethically find the money. And sometimes it comes from 2 or 3 different sources. And so that's how I think about that, is the funding of it. Another way is that maybe it wouldn't be in person this year. Maybe it would be online, and we just experiment again. Can I get a $495 grant one time to try this year? And then that buys you a little bit of time. You learn, you pilot, you just kind of ease your way into this experience, and you don't have to ask for the travel funds. And then you know more, and then you have greater level of time to then kind of figure out, okay, how are we going to strategize to get to 1,095 or the 995? That's
Staying
how
on the topic of funding right now, and I'll get back to the other questions around it. Luis Gerardo asks, when should registration be paid? Is it before the coaching and training or before the competition? So when is our registration deadline for the fee?
Great. That sounds awesome. If you're interested, you have my email right here, so you can reach out, and then I would talk with you. Generally speaking, we have not sent out invoices yet. We will send them out probably early October is when we'll invoice teams. So we like to know pretty much who's going to compete by mid-October is really when we want to, because those coaches are going to need some time to sit down on a couple conversations with us to go a little bit deeper, consume the material and kind of get familiar with it, and then prepare for spring. So if we knew by mid-October, that would be wonderful. And then once you've committed, we will invoice you afterwards.
Okay. I think I got a couple of rapid fire questions here that you could probably answer in short bursts here.
Great.
Are the coaches in addition to the professor, or is there just one coach per team?
Great question. Sometimes there's 3 coaches. Sometimes I use a student, like a junior in college, as a co-coach, which is the most beautiful thing in the world, because then I look at her or him and I say, what'd you see? And they're talking to their peers. They have a totally different experience observing their peers participate and what they're missing and what they're capitalizing on, what they're doing well, the gaps. Once they start seeing it, they're learning just as well, just in a different way. So some teams we have co-coaches where it's 2 professionals. Sometimes it's a student affairs professional and an alum. So teams approach and universities approach coaches in very, very different ways. At some schools, it's a senior in college who is finishing their capstone leadership requirement, and they've participated in CLC over the years, and now they're coaching, supervised by a professional, but we have those 3 people who are coaching their team. So that's an interesting approach. So we don't dictate who has to be a coach, but we, again, would think creatively with you about who you could tap to do that work. Could be a graduate assistant we've had a number of different coaches from different pockets.
Okay, this next question, and keep in mind for those of you listening, we have not done a face-to-face competition in some years now because of COVID and all that. So this is going to be kind of pre-COVID example. how many teams approximately participate in the in-person competition and then in the online competition?
Great. So we will have, right now we have 10 roughly in Canada and the US live. I think we have 25, 21. I don't remember the number I sent yesterday, online teams. And again, we just do a couple things to kind of up the heat. So in the live competition, you're in a ballroom, there's all the tables, and one team finishes their task in 25 minutes and screams and yells, and your team looks up and they're not even close to being done, and stick with it, go for it. And we have kind of the scores and the scoreboard up all day, and then we have a scoreboard up virtually as well, and that creates some heat and some added stress for the teams as well. Again, you're there to support, but yeah, that's how the live version works. Did I answer that, Brandon?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay.
Well, and historically, and I'm sorry if I might have missed it, historically, how many face-to-face do we typically have?
Well, in the past, pre-COVID, we had regions. So we had a region of Northeast, we had a Mid-Atlantic region. We've moved away from the regional model and just gone to the global online, and then a US and a Canadian championship. And that might move. That the championships might move over the years, but we always want to have the online competition, because we believe that our students will be working face-to-face and virtually for their careers, most of them. So can we teach them to lead online and in a remote environment, and what do they have to have their eye on, and can they do it in person as well? So for now, it's just those 2 live competitions and then the virtual online. Now, as we grow, we have 3 or 4 teams in Maine. They have talked about getting together and having a Maine state scrimmage where they, elect a Maine champion, which would be great. We just aren't there yet.
Okay, a couple other quick ones here. When designing the class, how many students do you typically have in that class? Just ballpark?
So 30. Now, and then again, sometimes I'll do only 2 teams that actually compete in the competition. I'll do an internal competition among those teams of 6. Again, some great inner squad. They get really into learning the materials and doing well. And so I might sweeten the pot by saying you don't have to take exam 4 if you're one of the teams selected to participate in the competition. They've learned it beautifully at that point. They know the material. I can trust that they're good. So yeah, it's just get creative about it.
Right along those lines, because you're going to have multiple teams, so I know the answer to this, but I'll let you take it. Do you need to know the students participating by October, or just the coach, the team?
Just the coach, and that we want to have the team. Yep.
Yeah.
And then again, at Western University, for instance, they use graduate students to coach 6 teams, and then they run the experience locally, and then one of those teams actually competes in the global challenge. So it doesn't have to just, sometimes we hear, well, 6 students isn't really a lot. Well, you can involve a lot of students in the curriculum. It's just that you might not have a number of students actually competing in the final, April 4th and 6th. And Lisa, your classes tend to be in the hundreds, aren't they?
No, not for this section, or not for this course. This coming year, I'm going to have 24 students,
Okay.
and I'll have 3 coaches. So we'll have an 8-to-1 sort of ratio for that. And then, but we'll only have 1 team from my campus participate, and then we have another team from our other campus participate.
So this is a good question from Jen Lee, and I know Lisa already tackled it in the chat, but I want to make sure it's on the recording that people can hear it. Can in-person teams go to the closest location geographically in the other country? So if they were, if they're in the US, but the Canadian site is greater proximity, can they, and more cost effective, and maybe in some cases, can they opt in for that one?
I don't see why we couldn't do that, unless the Canadians are like, no, we only want Canadian teams. Lisa, do you only want Canadian teams?
We will
Would it
take
be
anyone who wants to
acceptable
be
that
a
a
part.
US team wins the Canadian Invitational? Jen, you could really disrupt Canada here. Jen, there's an opportunity. Oof,
She's in
that would
Rochester. She's basically
walking
Canadian,
into
right?
your house, and I should say your country. I think we would be open to that, Jen. Yeah.
Nice. And so there was another question back here from Sharon I want to circle back around to. This is a really good question, actually. Do you ever need volunteer coaches who do not have their own teams?
We need judges. We need volunteer judges. And that's another way to raise your hand and say, hey, I'm more than willing to judge. So Sharon, you judging at John Carroll when we have the competition would be wonderful. And you would kind of, again, it's a great way to kind of see what we're up to, learn a little bit more. So that's always an option. Coaching, generally, the university kind of identifies that individual, but you could raise your hand, and if we found out about someone who needed a coach, we could then plug you in if it was geographically reasonable. Or Sharon,
And
go ahead.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you'd always be welcome to come and observe a practice at John Carroll. Kent State has a team, Mount Union. So there's teams in the Northeast Ohio area that are participating.
So I'm throwing this out here at a left field to you, Scott, but
Yeah.
It's something I was actually texting with Kevin Lowe on the side here about.
Yeah.
Have we ever had a hybrid team where you had, say, one coach and three members, and one coach and three members from two universities somewhere else, and they've got to learn how to work, collaborate, etc., virtually and in person in kind of smaller segments, which is a little bit more in line with a lot of some of the workplace structure today.
We have not ever had a hybrid team that I know of. Lisa, I think we would have the conversation for sure.
Okay.
We almost had a hybrid team last year, a consortium of it's an organization in Canada that has a number of different residence halls. So it's almost like a residence hall association, and there are a bunch of different locations. They were going to try to put together a team as an organization, and we'd allowed it. So yeah, we would try it.
Felicia Taylor asked, I'm sorry.
I was going to say, we sort of had a hybrid team last year for the Global Challenge. One of our participants dropped out from my campus for the Global Challenge. So we did recruit a student from the other campus who they'd never worked with before. We threw that in for some rapid change for the global competition. And they did a great job together. So, I mean, Zoom, that hybrid world can certainly facilitate that, I think.
Nice. So it's just something to think about. It splits resources up in a few different ways. For MOBTSers in the group that have been attending conferences for a long time together, it might be a effective way to tackle some team teaching and things along those lines. So again, just something that we've been discussing on the side. Felicia Taylor had asked, "What is the process to become a judge? How do we go about that?"
Just email me and we'll get you on the list, and then we'll start communicating with you. It's a commitment of probably, if it's live, it would be, 8:30 to 5 on a Saturday, March 16th. And if it's virtual, it's a Thursday night and it's a Saturday morning. So, but again, we hear that from judges as well, that it goes by quickly because you're just consumed with watching these humans try and navigate this situation, whatever it is they find themselves in. And so that it goes by quickly.
Excellent. Does anybody else have any other questions? I think we tackled everything in the chat. Does anybody feel like jumping in and with their voice? Okay. I want to thank everybody. We will post all this information to our MOBTS list, to the MOBTS website. More information will be coming out in the days and weeks to come about these events, about registration and all that. We hope to see a lot of you there. If nothing else, I think those on the MOBTS board of directors who have been talking about this for a while and working with the CLC, one of the highlights that we were thinking about is, to have this event in March or in April, whichever one or both that you would choose, and then coming together at our annual MOBTS conference with kind of those competitive juices still flowing, like, having Sharon beat Carol's team, for example, things along those lines. So it should make for a fun time. It should make for a fun community. It's certainly an expansion of our MOBTS community and the CLC community. There's not a whole lot of overlap between these two groups, yet the efforts and the vision and the mission are so much aligned. So we do anticipate seeing the constituency of each bleed over into the other groups. So we look forward in MOBTS to welcoming our longtime CLC attendees, and we look forward in the CLC to welcoming the longtime MOBTS members and attendees. So if there's anything that we can do for you, please let us know. You saw Scott's email. You're certainly email him if you have any questions on the MOBTS end of things. please reach out to me. I'm sure you get enough spam from me that you know where to find me. And other than that, we look forward to seeing you at the upcoming CLC, hopefully.
Yes. Thank you, Brandon. Thank you, Dave, Lisa, Kevin. Good to see you. Thanks everyone
you,
for being
Scott.
with us. Thank you. Thank you.
Excellent.
Thank
Take
you.
care, all.
Thanks.